Hey guys, this is Yuruzi. This is part 3 of What If Naruto Grew Up with a Pack of Demons. Growing up with a pack of demons is easy, especially when the older he gets, the more a demon Naruto becomes. But when the pack is killed by shinobi, Naruto vows revenge by learning to use his ever-growing chakra. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel and check out the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 11, Journey to Konoha. Sandane had cried when the reports had come that Uzumaki had been presumed dead. It was something that always left bile in his throat. No one liked to see their Kage cry, and even though it wasn't over something people would call dire, it was still a memory better left forgotten. He had only held Naruto once, and it had been a short affair, but Sandane had become attached in the few months he had custody of the orphan. He had been attempting to find suitable foster parents for the boy, but none of the villagers wanted to take him in, so Sarutobi had kept him in the meantime. Naruto had grown on him, Konohamaru hadn't been conceived yet, his children had long past ascended into adulthood, and those baby blue eyes and toothless grin had melted the staff's hearts one by one, because, despite what lay within him, Naruto had been an incredibly happy baby. Kakashi had often come in to report missions, to see his Hokage bouncing the blonde rhythmically on one knee many times, and it was one of the things that were popular amongst the kunoichi. The tolerant ones, that is, the ones that were lucky enough not to lose a lover, husband, child, friend, or family member during the battle with the nine-tailed fox demon. All others would avert their eyes, turn their heads, and remain silent in the presence of the Hokage out of fear and respect. But mostly fear. And then he had been taken from his crib, and the body of the perpetrator had been found in grisly half-eaten pieces, with no Naruto. And the Sandane had cried. And yet, here was a child with wild blonde hair and the bluest eyes he had ever seen on a human being, with the same faint lines across his cheeks that Naruto had, though these lines were so faint, they were almost pale white lines. The youth looked about 12, about 10 pounds underweight, and had a slightly feral aura about him, perhaps due to the feathers that adorned his locks and the jewelry that hung from his ears, neck, wrists, and ankles. But Kakashi knew, without a shadow of a doubt, who this child was, and the fear that swelled up in his throat was unwelcome, because that familiar chakra belonged to a creature he was right to fear, and the slight smear near the youth's navel made his suspicions valid. Uzumaki Naruto was alive, and his seal was practically gone. The reaction was immediate. The boy had said only 2 words and Sasuke already hated him. Perhaps it was the way he looked, like some kind of ethereal dream out of some fantasy picture book, or maybe it was his strange accent that was so foreign he didn't know where to place it. Everything about him seemed too perfect, the color of his eyes, the perfect gold of his hair. He shone like a beacon, and Sakura's annoying gasps seemed to accentuate it more. The blonde took a fluid step forward, leaving the cover of the trees, the blue eyes darting between all of them. There was something strange about that movement, the way his eyes darted, quick and sharp, the kind he had seen on wild animals. Sasuke glanced at Kakashi and took in his masked face. He felt he knew his sensei enough to read the elusive facial expressions that were hidden behind the mask, and how tensely he stared at the youth, eye laced with disbelief, and strangely, recognition. He was also gripping his dirty book so hard that the spine was beginning to bend. The dark brown eye remained trained on the youth. "Hello," the boy greeted again, smiling cheerfully, eyes once again drifting between them before glancing sideways at Kakashi, a flash of wariness passing over the angelic face. Hello. I'm Sakura," his teammate stuttered, blushing crimson as she spoke. The youth's eyes darted to her face, and his nostrils flared, as if he was trying to sniff her. Sasuke's eyes narrowed and he took a step forward. The reaction was immediate. The boy's head jerked toward him, eyes intense, nostrils flaring in response. The body then became still the way live things couldn't, like he was trying to fade into the scenery, like a piece of furniture. "Sasuke," Kakashi said in a steady voice, the warning quite clear. Natsu glanced between his team, feeling slightly puzzled. He could feel no killing intent radiating off the stranger. The boy had been polite, and it seemed, he was clearly unsure of what to do now that the always imposing Sasuke seemed intent on frightening him. This was where he came in, to always clean up the social messes Sasuke created on what seemed a daily basis. "Hi there," he called cheerfully, breaking through the tense atmosphere. The strange blonde seemed to shiver back into existence and turned inquisitive eyes toward him. "I'm Kazuya Natsu of Team 7, at your service," he pointed at his Hitai 8 that sat comfortably above his brow. I'm a shinobi of Hidden Leaf Konoha. It's a pleasure to meet you. These are my teammates, Haruno Sakura, and Uchiha Sasuke, along with our sensei, Hitaki Kakashi. And may I have the pleasure of asking who I might be talking to? No one could ever accuse Natsu of not being thorough. The blonde stared at him for what seemed like minutes, before the smile returned to his face. My name is Sunny. I'm going to the hidden village. I'm going the right way. You sure are. Natsu said with a friendly laugh before turning to their sensei. Hey, here's an idea, why don't we let him come along with us? He turned to the youth again. You got family in Konoha? The question was appropriate. This Sunny didn't sound like he'd come from anywhere near Fire Country. The youth cocked his head, looking slightly puzzled, before shaking his head. He then turned and gazed up at Kakashi, eyes darting between his face and his hands. I suppose it will be alright, Kakashi stated slowly, as if testing his own words. As long as he behaves himself. Natsu gave a chuckle and threw an arm around the stranger. Don't you worry. You're traveling with a good team. We just got back from a mission, let's tell him about it, Sakura-chan. He began to usher the blonde down the road, Sakura trailing along in excitement. Sasuke remained behind, eyes narrow and watchful. Who is he, sensei? I know you recognize him. He turned and glanced up at the older man in trepidation. Kakashi released the damaging grip he had on his book before turning his eye toward his student. Someone I thought to be long dead. Be very watchful, Sasuke. He then began to follow the others, eyes trained once again on his book, but it was blatantly clear, he was watching the newcomer. As Sasuke sped up to follow, he saw the youth turn his head back, and those blue eyes ran over Kakashi again, then fell on him. Though his arm was still tossed over his shoulder, Natsu was too into his story to notice that Sunny, or so he had dubbed himself, was paying him no mind. Again it felt like there was something completely alien about the youth, those two bright eyes suddenly seemed like steel. Then the youth looked at Natsu, grinned, and turned his back to Sasuke. Oh, yes, he would be very watchful of this Sunny. He was second-guessing his decisions again, not because he thought it had been a bad idea to join up with the shinobi, but because this Sakura-chan female smelled so good. Every time her blood would rush to her face, a whiff of her delectable skin would hit him straight on. It was all he could do to keep from drooling openly, and embarrassing himself. He was lucky that this Natsu seemed completely oblivious of his nature, but he couldn't say the same for the two that trailed behind them. He cared not for the small black-haired one that was attempting to intimidate him with his black glares, and he would have laughed in his face or ripped it off, either one would have suited his desires, if not for the looming presence that walked just behind him. The one called Sensei Kakashi, or was it just Kakashi, that made him nervous and wary. He was the one that held all the source, he was the one that he was sure he hadn't fooled, and he supposed he hadn't fooled this Sasuke either, but he knew that when it came to decisions and actions, what the leader thought was what was important. He could remember how many times Soren had tried to get him in trouble, but could never follow through without Crick's approval. Either he needed this Kakashi's approval, or he needed to exert some dominance over him, though he didn't know how it could be done if their leader knew more of the source than he did. Sunny turned and stared at Natsu, who was babbling on about some type of wave, and ice mirrors. The words made little sense to him as the boy was talking too fast. Hey Sunny, where do you hail from anyway? Sunny blinked in startlement. The boy obviously had the habit of changing topics at startling speeds. Where do I hail from? He asked, staring at the dirty blonde. Sakura-chan nodded and spoke for the first time. Sorry, what he means is where were you born? Where did you used to live? We notice you have an accent. Immediately he felt the burning gazes of the two behind him, especially from the leader. This information must be important, and he decided to be a little honest, or as honest as he could be. I came from the forest. Natsu scratched his head, looking confused. You mean this forest? Sunny shook his head. The forests beyond the grass. He watched as the female blinked a few times then smiled. Beyond the grass? Do you mean you come from Earth Country? Then she looked nervous. You're not a ninja from Hidden Stone, are you? She smelled delicious. No. I lived in forest. He was becoming agitated. His last meal had been that man, he had been too excited to eat after that, which was about 2 days ago, and here was a perfectly tasty-looking human being flaunted in front of his face. It made a demon angry. Natsu was the first to notice the way Sunny's face seemed frozen, and yet it was obvious that he was grinding his teeth, eyes trained on Sakura with what seemed a slightly crazed look. Perhaps his stay in the forest had come to a timely end. Natsu dropped his arm from his shoulder and gave a nervous laugh that hit the ears of Sasuke and Kakashi, who had been listening to the conversation closely. Kakashi immediately felt the killing intent that wafted through the air, and spoke before he could stop himself. Naruto, I mean. He stopped in silent embarrassment as the team stopped, Natsu casting him a puzzled but thankful look, while Sasuke stared at him in suspicion. Naruto had settled for a wary gaze, though the killing intent had disappeared. Who? Sakura asked, frowning at her sensei. Kakashi rubbed the back of his head and smiled behind the mask. Oh, nothing. Just that Sunny here reminds me of someone I used to know. That's all. My mistake. Naruto, the boy said, blue eyes going distant for a moment before falling on him again. I know that name somehow. Do you now? Kakashi whispered, staring at the boy. Could it be possible? But then, Naruto had been a little less than 9 months when he had been taken, he wouldn't, or more like shouldn't, be able to remember his name. He was positive that this was Uzumaki Naruto now, and was equally determined to bring him before the Hokage. Who had taken care of Naruto all these years? Who in the forests of Earth Country? The group began to walk on again, this time steeped in silence, and Kakashi shuddered at the pure silence that filled the forests on either side of them. The sounds of birds, or life in general, had been leached from the place, as if all was aware of what was in its presence. He had only heard such silences in the aftermath of a great battle, when the ground was littered with the dead, and the animals had yet to return. Even Sakura began to become aware of the silence, and her eyes darted at the tree line, shoulders hunched and slowly beginning to walk closer to Natsu, who was staring at the road ahead. Naruto was the only one that seemed unaffected by the silence, most likely because he was the cause of it, Kakashi had no doubt, and he walked on pleasantly, all but gliding on the dirt road, earrings and necklaces jingling against bare skin. The youth was only wearing brown pants that had been rolled up to his knees, probably one of the reasons why Sakura spent so much time blushing when her eyes fell on him. Natsu's voice broke the ever-increasing void with a force that made them all start. So Sunny, what brings you to Konoha anyway, if you don't have any family down here? Naruto turned and grimaced, an emotion passing through his eyes that Kakashi could only dub as rage. My family, he spoke as if the word was foreign to him, was killed a year ago. I have nowhere else to go but home, to this place. He then turned to Natsu and gave a blinding smile. And I want to be a ninja. You kid. Natsu said in excitement, then hesitated. I'm not sure, you might be too late. How old are you? I'm 12 now. Well, he glanced back at Kakashi, and Naruto turned and gave him a piercing look. Kakashi held his gaze until Naruto looked away, then he turned to Natsu. As long as he can mold chakra, and he's still young enough to enter the academy. Natsu turned to Naruto in glee. You hear that? This is great, Sakura and I can show you all the basics. Naruto glanced at Sakura who blushed and nodded, then seemed pleased. We can start tomorrow, and maybe Kakashi-sensei can show you some techniques for chakra control or Sakura can. She's great with chakra control. Sakura blushed and lightly slapped Natsu's shoulder in playful embarrassment. In the end, Kakashi was feeling slightly ill, for the journey back seemed like it would be as perilous as wave. When the sun had dropped to the horizon, Kakashi called for setting up camp, and the group nervously began to set it up. They wouldn't have felt so edgy if not for a few factors, one being that the silence had remained and talk had stopped after Natsu had finished his lesson on what shinobi of Hidden Leaf believed. They had fallen into that silence, and had felt close to being swallowed up by it, and again, the only person who seemed completely comfortable was Naruto. He was at fault for the other reason as well. Once dark had fully set in, they discovered that Naruto's eyes glowed in the dark, 2 spots of eerie blue that moved, and when they fell on them, it was like being caught under the gaze of a basilisk. Sakura had nervously mentioned his glowing eyes, and Naruto had stated, rather naturally, as if glowing eyes were normal, that they glowed because they were catching any light so he could see in the dark. That must be useful for catching prey, Sasuke had remarked sardonically, and while the 2 others had their backs turned, Naruto sent him a feral grin and a flash of sharp teeth. You have no idea, he had whispered, and that voice had been laced with hunger, a hunger that had chilled both teacher and student. Once the fire had been started and the tents were settled, the team sat around the light and began to eat their rations. Natsu offered his salted jerky, telling the boy about the type of food ninjas normally ate when on missions. Naruto had declined the food with a dissatisfied sniff and instead settled for staring at Sakura with longing. Sakura caught the gaze and blushed, obviously mistaking it for something else. But Kakashi knew it wasn't lust, for one, he was too young and had yet to even reach puberty. He just looked hungry. "I'll take the first watch," Kakashi said, drawing Naruto's eyes away from his student. "Sasuke, I want you to take the second watch." Sasuke nodded. It was clear that he would have objected if someone else was given the second watch. With that, Natsu stretched, yawned, and stood up, turning to the youth next to him. "Hey Sonny, why don't you bunk up with me for the night?" He gestured toward his tent. Naruto glanced back at the tent, then shook his head. "I'm not sleepy." Again he said it as if the word was foreign to him. Natsu shrugged and headed for his tent. "Good night then." "Good night," came the sinister reply, one that sent a shiver up Natsu's spine, and he swiveled around to see the glowing blue eyes trained on him, and a pleasant smile pasted on the face. Natsu swallowed and nodded, disappearing into his tent. Sasuke, who had been standing up to dust himself off, was staring at the blonde stranger, eyes narrowed. He turned and looked at Kakashi, who was reading his book by firelight. Kakashi nodded minutely, and Sasuke turned and disappeared into his tent. Moments later it was just the two of them, and though it seemed as if he was completely engrossed in his book, Kakashi was watching Naruto watch him. The glowing blue eyes seemed fixated on him, and in the eerie silence Kakashi could almost hear the cogs whirring in Naruto's mind. As he turned the page, he tested the ground. "I wonder where all the animals have gone," he muttered, and saw the blue orbs narrow in response. Kakashi sighed and settled himself in for a grueling night watch. Naruto was an alien presence to him, completely unpredictable and utterly dangerous. He couldn't wait to give him to the higher-ups. It was an hour before he would awake Sasuke, and Kakashi was having his doubts. He didn't want to leave the Uchiha alone and wake to find his body or what was left of it, for he had his suspicions, on the campgrounds. Naruto had remained in the same spot all night, unmoving, as if he were not existing, not even breathing, eyes trained onto the trees, unmoving, unblinking. The void of silence had seemed to grow, not even the cicadas, and the grasshoppers seemed to be in the area. It was almost as if the forest had cleared out completely, and it seemed as if he was completely oblivious to this. Or was he? Sasuke's time came and went, and he didn't bother waking the Uchiha, though he was sure to see the glares in the morning. He had gone through the book twice, and was now merely admiring the art, when Naruto's voice came slicing through the silence, a sinister, heavily accented voice. It was strange, that it seemed that every word he said was perfectly pronounced with a special kind of care that told him that Japanese was not Naruto's native language. He had been to all the countries, had heard every accent, but Naruto's was completely unknown to him. "Are you sleepy?" he asked, blue eyes trained on him once again. Kakashi turned a page and sighed. "I have spent many missions without sleep. This is nothing." Though in truth, he could use that last bit of healing sleep. Though most of his injuries from Wave were gone, he still had a few that made him tired. "You are still sleepy," Naruto stated matter-of-factly. "I can smell it on your skin." Kakashi lifted his gaze and stared directly into those blue orbs, though, for some reason, they were now more on the purple side. "Why don't you go rest?" He lifted a hand toward the empty tent, the first movement he had made beyond eyes and lips. "I can watch the camp for you." Kakashi lowered the book. "And what of you? Are you not tired? You look like you've had a long journey." The hand lowered, and the eyes remained on him, calculating and cold. "Then, I do not need sleep. Ever." There was a truthful finality in those words that told Kakashi that he was telling the truth, and the goosebumps returned. The purple eyes narrowed to complete slits, as if in response to his uneasiness. Kakashi lifted the book again and turned the page. "I do not need sleep tonight. But thanks for the offer." He did not wait for a response, and neither did he receive one. It was a long night. Author's note. When Sunny/Naruto is referred to as Naruto, it's because it's in Kakashi's point of view. Sunny/Naruto still refers to himself as Sunny. Chapter 12, The Game. "You didn't wake me up." The Uchiha was glaring death at his sensei, hair disheveled from what looked like a good night's rest. "Not now, Sasuke. I couldn't take any chances. Not last night anyway." Kakashi glanced back at Naruto, who was in the same position as he had been all night, eyes trained on the treetops. The color of his eyes had progressed back to that unnatural blue, making the Jounin wonder if he had imagined the purple. Natsu's tent flapped open and the genin pulled himself drowsily from the tent. As he stretched and yawned, he smiled and greeted them all. "Good morning everyone," he beamed cheerfully at the grouchy Sakura who emerged from her tent scratching at her skin and muttering about baths. Naruto dropped his frozen gaze from the trees and smiled pleasantly at the two. "Good afternoon Natsu, Sakura." While Sakura blushed, Natsu gave a light chuckle. "Actually Sunny, it's not afternoon yet. Actually, it's only 7 in the morning. Noon is some time away." "I don't care what time it is," Sakura said wryly. "All I want is a decent bath. Kakashi-sensei, can we stop at that river to wash up a bit? Please." Kakashi yawned behind his mask and glanced at the sun. "Sure Sakura, but the Endo River is a day away." Sakura groaned and rubbed her face while Natsu frowned and squinted his eyes at Naruto. "Sunny?" The mysterious child turned to look at him. "Have you been in that same spot all night?" Naruto blinked at him and nodded. "Wow," Natsu said, seeming overwhelmed for a moment. "You sure weren't kidding when you said you weren't sleepy." Naruto nodded then stood up fluidly, like he hadn't just spent the night in one spot. Kakashi grimaced at all the signs that were blaring at him, that Naruto was more than just a child, and began to pack up his tent. In the meantime, Natsu offered Naruto part of his rations like last night, and this time the youth accepted a biscuit, munching idly away, making a face of distinct dissatisfaction. After they had packed up camp and dropped sand over the campfire, the team began to head out. They noticed the subtle sounds of tentative bird call, and it seemed forest life was returning, albeit hesitantly. Natsu continued his lecture on the art of shinobi, Naruto gazing forward, head cocked slightly toward the dirty blonde, listening as the youth went through the guidelines. After some time, Sakura pulled out a small handbook, guideline to the genin and handed the brown booklet to Naruto, who immediately began to flip through the pages, eyes running over the words quickly. By mid-afternoon they took a break, Sakura muttering fantasies about the bath she hoped to take when they reached the river. Naruto partook of both Natsu's and Sakura's meals, though he seemed to relish Sakura's a bit more, sending her wistful looks between bites. It was an hour after the meal when Sasuke made his move. He had been watching Naruto all day, black eyes trained on the blonde head for hours on end, like he was trying to pry his way through the other youth's mind. "So, Sunny, why don't you show us your use of chakra?" Sakura immediately turned to Sasuke with a smile, Natsu grimaced, and Kakashi sighed, aware of the tone in Sasuke's voice. It was the, "I'm about to show how much better than you I am by how poorly you're about to do" look. At first it seemed as if Naruto was going to ignore him, for all that he remained staring ahead, but then he stopped and turned to the Uchiha, blue yes sharp and full of secrets. He dug into the pouch at his side and pulled out what looked like small green leaves and stuck them in his mouth, chewing on them like he was chewing on thoughts. "How would you like me to show you, Chakra?" Sasuke smirked and took a step forward. "A spar?" Natsu waved his hands nervously. "Come on now Sasuke. I don't think he's ready for something like that. Leave." Sasuke sent him a look that clearly said, "Shut up," and got in a battle stance. Natsu sent a pleading look toward his sensei, but Kakashi's eye was riveted on the two youths. On one hand, he was aware that Naruto was not quite human, the writing was clearly on the wall, and he knew that a fight with one of his students would be dangerous. On the other hand, he needed to know what Naruto was capable of before he brought him within sight of his beloved home. The dark-haired human reminded him of Zorn, the thought made him slightly ill, and it did not help that he was already agitated beyond belief. Though it turned out easy to get information on the ninja kind, the human food that he had reluctantly eaten was sticking to his insides, for some reason refusing to be processed into energy. This left him feeling full, which was better than feeling hungry, but also very unsettled, and for the first time he could justifiably use the word queasy as a description. He now understood what that term meant, and felt like to his chagrin. He wanted to throw it all back up, but knew that he would be even more ravenous and could possibly attack the human female Sakura. That would most likely leave 3 angry human ninja left. At that point, he was even pondering his chances of getting away with eating her, was sure it was possible to defeat Natsu and the annoying Sasuke, but could he avoid the leader? He had chewed thoughtfully on it for hours before he had given it up as a lost cause, but still felt miserable. It would come down to hunting for some regular animals if he wanted some proper food, and now the stupid human boy was obviously challenging him. He knew that this Sasuke boy didn't like him, and he really could care less, one silly pointless existence that this piece of walking food was. But he was posing as a problem though. He was definitely at Zorn. Sunny stood across from the Sasuke boy and became still. He was hesitant to reveal his source, chakra, to them because he was acutely aware that his felt much different from theirs. While their chakra felt calm and rich, like the flow of water in a steady stream, or a gusty wind, his was always malicious and wild, like flames from an inferno. It attracted attention, he was sure of it, and he was unsure how it would be received. The pack had died for his mistakes. Would he too join them? He resolved not to use it, not until he felt like he had to, or wanted to for that matter. Then the Sasuke boy was moving, coming swiftly up to him with a kick aimed for his head. Sunny grabbed the leg centimeters from his face and spun the boy around by the appendage before releasing him. The human soared through the air and landed niftily on his feet, a flash of wariness running through his dark eyes before he surged forward again. This time he threw 3 shuriken at him, which he dodged easily, rumbling deep in his chest and missing the round eyes of 2 of his spectators as he awaited the human boy's next attack. Sasuke followed through with a swift much, then combined it with a kick that Sunny first dodged, then blocked, snickering at the pure lack of strength in those limbs. Humans were so weak, they really were pathetic. Naruto leaped forward and aimed for the human's chest, hoping to crush the ribs, but the boy swerved out of the way and swiped a kunai at his face, cutting some hair from his locks. Sasuke then leaped back, eyeing him before something interesting happened. Sunny felt him use his chakra, felt the surge and watched in slight fascination as black eyes turned a dark bloody red with strange dot-like things in them. Humans were always full of unpleasant surprises. "Hey Sasuke," came Natsu's distressed voice. "I don't think the Sharingan is necessary." The Sasuke boy surged toward him, and he seemed faster than before, managing to land a swift punch squarely on Sunny's jaw, but still it lacked any strength. Sunny's head jerked back, and he made a small guttering noise in his throat, something heavy and dark that made the Sasuke boy's eyes widen, and the momentary scent of fear laced through the air. Agitated, and already wishing for some real food, the scent was savory and sweet, causing Sunny to swipe at the human, hoping to cut open that soft flesh and spill a few delectable droplets of his sweet blood. But what Sasuke lacked in strength he had gained in speed. He disappeared from before him, only to appear behind him. There was a surge of that cool chakra, and out of the corner of his eye he saw the flash of hands making those strange and foreboding movements. Katan, Ryuka no Jutsu. Sunny managed to swivel about, only to be consumed by an intense heat and a burning he had never felt before. Kakashi was apprehensive during the short spar. Naruto seemed unaffected by Sasuke's punch, which would have sent any other flying, had tossed Sasuke like he weighed nothing, and seemed to slowly become excited by the fighting in general. The telltale signs were the slight purple of his eyes and the strange and disturbing sounds emitting from his chest and throat area. But when Sasuke had activated his newly acquired Sharingan, Kakashi had made to step forward, to stop him from using the fire jutsu on the other youth, but had been too slow, and Naruto's arms and chest were engulfed in a large stream of fire. "Sunny!" Natsu cried and surged forward as an ear-splitting scream emerged from the inferno. Kakashi quickly summoned a water jutsu and doused the flailing youth much at the same time as Natsu, destroying the flames that had engulfed Naruto's chest, arms, and neck. The blonde youth staggered back with a high-pitched whine that grated on their ears and disappeared into the trees. "For God's sake, Sasuke!" Natsu snapped. "Have you no control? He's not even in the academy." The Uchiha grimaced but made no reply. "You all stay together. I'm going after him," and Kakashi leapt into the trees, following the smell of burnt flesh. Burns were always a nasty ordeal. They scarred heavily, and ached like none other, a pain that always ate up everything else. There was usually nothing but the pain, and he imagined that he would find Naruto in a rather ugly state. Moments later he spotted the blonde youth crouching on a branch, rocking back and forth, arms wrapped around his head. Kakashi settled quietly on a nearby branch, eyes warily following the burns that riddled Naruto's arms and no doubt chest and stomach. The flesh was blackened and raw, pieces of skin had been peeled back to show meat. The pain must be excruciating, but Naruto made no noise. "And Sunny," he called quietly, "let's get you fixed up." There wasn't much he would be able to do until they made it to Konoha, however, since he had never been much of a medic, but he carried some strong sedatives, some that might be able to put the boy out of his misery for a few hours or so. Naruto stopped rocking and lifted his head, causing Kakashi to suck in his breath. Those blue eyes were no longer. In their place was bright crimson, vertical pupils ringed in an orange fire and a rage that was literally tangible. Naruto uncurled himself and stood up, eyes trained on the jounin. There was no pain in his eyes, just anger, and that was when he noticed the rapidly healing flesh along his body, the oozing burns turning to blisters, muscles reforming. A groan that was deep and heavy passed through the air and the youth plucked at the damaged bracelets on his wrists. They dropped to the forest floor, along with a majority of his necklaces. His earrings had survived the short inferno, and within moments he noticed that there really were no signs that he had been burned badly. "Are you all right?" The boy's head moved forward and cocked to the side in an almost bird-like manner. "I am fine. Pain is a passing matter. I do not fear pain." His accent was even heavier than before, and he noticed with a chill that there was a strange hiss of air behind each word that sounded completely sinister. "What do you fear?" Kakashi asked, knowing that he would get no answer from the child. The lips pulled into a leer, sharp teeth gleaming viciously at him. Then Naruto turned and headed back toward Team 7, Kakashi quickly following. He did not like this. It was almost like the spar had not happened, like memory along with the burns had vanished. But he knew better. When Naruto dropped onto the path where Team 7 remained, Natsu and Sakura ran up to him. "Sonny, are you all right?" Their eyes darted over his body, mouths opened when they realized he was perfectly fine. "I guess you're all right," Natsu said faintly, eyes running up and down Naruto's body before squinting at him curiously. "You didn't tell me you had a Kekkei Genkai." "But then, I should have known with the glowing eyes and all." "What is a Kekkei Genkai?" Sonny asked, no longer carrying that strange hiss, and eyes back to their brilliant blue. Natsu held up a finger in pause and pulled the pack off his back, digging into it then pulling out a folded white shirt. "I should have given this to you earlier," he said and shook the shirt open, handing it to the Jinchuriki. Naruto took the shirt, sniffed it once, then began to pull it on, beaming at the genin as he smoothed the shirt to his chest. "Thank you." They began to move along, Natsu talking of bloodlines and the spar seeming forgotten. Kakashi glanced at Sasuke and noticed the Uchiha heir was studying his knuckles, and noticed that the fist was swollen. He sent Naruto a puzzled and troubled look before dropping the hand and brooding on. Naruto was listening with great interest to the lectures, perfectly whole and comfortable in his brown pants and white shirt, but he knew better. Of course he hadn't forgotten. It was obvious what the human boy Sasuke had initiated. The game. It was Zorn and Spate who had introduced him to the game, which usually happened over kill times. Zorn would take Spate's food or the two would disagree over something, and one would attack. Whatever it was, one would make the move, and the other would retaliate, later. It was what made the game so exciting, the wait, the wonder when the other was going to serve out some payback. Sometimes it was days, other times it was weeks. The tension, the wonder, and it always came as a surprise. No matter if they knew that the other was to make his move, when it actually happened, it was always a shock. And that was what made the game so fun. Of course, for years Sonny had been excluded from the game, not because he had been too young, but because his retaliations had always been quick with rather punishable results. If Zorn took his food, or hit him, or anything to make him miserable for that matter, Sonny would just cry, and he was good at crying. He would give off such a screech that had the pack gritting its teeth and Crick snapping at Zorn to give the food back or apologize. Either way, there was no playing the game with Sonny, not until he understood that it wasn't very demonly to cry in such a manner. After that, he had always been slow in his retaliation, waiting up to months before he would suddenly bite Zorn or Spate. It was through the game that he learned patience, learned that waiting and watching was the best way to surprise and inflict the most damage. And damage he would do to this Sasuke. He wouldn't wait months though, perhaps only a day, since he didn't know how long a human's memory lasted. Mayu was always forgetting things when she was alive. His hand ran along the remaining necklaces, only 3 of them and one belonging to the Snake Man. Mayu's had been burned away along with many of the necklaces that he had collected. If Sasuke wanted to see what he could do with the source, then Sonny would give him more than he could swallow, consequences be damned. Before that evening, it was clear that the human food was not going to be digested, and it remained sitting in his stomach, heavy muck that seemed to weigh him down. He felt fortunate that the forest animals were beginning to return. He could hear the rustle of animal life, the piercing cries of bird song. Unlike Mayu's home, which had been a place of lingering death, and the animals would never return, this forest was fresh, with more natural deaths. The Sasuke boy had returned to staring at him again, which he ignored in favor of some critical thinking. To his chagrin, he was going to have to accept that resting was going to arrive sooner than he had surmised. He had hoped he would have until Konoha before resting approached, But the burns he had received had caused a more extensive healing than he had ever had before, pulling on the last of his reserves, all of which had been low anyway. For some time now, his reserves had been small, something he could only attribute to his appetite-less depression a year before, and even though he had spent that year trying to build it back up, it was becoming increasingly apparent that he had thrown his body off of a very rigid routine, and perhaps it would take years before everything worked at maximum proficiency again. Sunny clenched his fists. It seemed as if he could only properly function when someone was telling him what to do. Sunny opened his fists and gazed at the small marks of blood that remained after the cuts had healed. He noticed his blood was darker than human blood, a much deeper crimson so that it almost looked black. "Sunny, was your family shinobi?" Sakura's voice intruded upon his morbid thoughts. Sunny looked up at her and smiled. "No, they did not like violence." Sunny suppressed the urge to snort. The pack had always enjoyed violence. The human female nodded. "I know how that is. Only my grandparents were shinobi, and they didn't make it past Chunin, so I want to make it to Jounin. No one in Natsu's family are ninja either." Sakura glanced over at the dirty blonde. "Which I've always wondered. How come you joined the academy?" Natsu, who had been reading a few scrolls, glanced up and smiled. "Honestly, and don't laugh, I used to watch the ninja run the rooftops when I was very young. I was so enamored that he sent them a sheepish look. I joined up." He then turned to Sunny with a puzzled frown. "Are you sure you didn't belong to a shinobi clan? You clearly have some type of Kekai Genkai. Have you any affinity towards a certain type of animal? Dog? Cat? Other? How about elements? Water? Fire? Earth? I don't know." He glanced at their leader, who was gazing at their surroundings. "Truly we were." He paused to think carefully of the pronunciation, "isolated." Was Natsu's mystified reply. As night fell and the humans began to make camp again, Sunny decided it was time to rid his body of the human food that sat in his stomach like lead. He glanced at the human pack. The Kakashi leader was setting up his tent while Sakura and Natsu gathered firewood. He was more wary of fire today than he had been the day before, for obvious reasons. He had never been burned before. The Sasuke boy was standing nearby, black eyes trained on him, causing Sunny to leer at him and turn towards the forest. "Where are you going?" came the boy's voice. Sunny glanced back at him, his eyes catching the natural light from the night sky and searching for the human words he needed. "I need to relieve myself," he said with a precarious shrug, baring slightly sharp teeth as he shrank into the forest. Quickly he put some distance between himself and the humans, then paused to stick his index and middle finger down his throat, bringing up the human food, a thick paste that had never processed. Sunny grumbled in trepidation and climbed into the trees. He settled on a branch, pulled off his white shirt and neatly folded it before sticking it in a corner and becoming completely still. Sunny took a deep breath, drinking in the forest scents and admiring the mammoth trees and their thick canopies. The trees of Fire Country were so large, in fact, he was sure that many forest-dwelling packs could live quite well in them. Not too far off he could hear Natsu ask after him, his voice laced with worry, and Sunny tuned him out as the sound of a predator moved through the thicket. He could tell it was a carnivore even before its scent hit his nose, the way it moved, silently, carefully, perhaps with years of practice and months of invincibility. Sunny grinned, baring his now fully sharp teeth, eyes bleeding crimson. But he was the ultimate predator. He leaned forward, nostrils flaring at the musky scent of wolf. He was the master of the forest, none could match his prowess. The wolf paused, perhaps realizing how close it actually was to the demon. Sunny did not give him the chance to retreat. He leaped through the trees, grabbing a branch, then angling himself head first as the wolf passed frantically under him. Sunny landed on its sturdy back. The wolf spun around, ready to take a vicious bite at the assailant. Sunny grabbed its jaw and tore it from the muzzle, and as the wolf screamed he quickly twisted the head, snapping the neck. The wolf's body spasmed and slumped to the earth. Sunny shuddered and immediately tore through the thick fur, ripping past skin to get to the meaty parts. He ate quickly and without reservation, blood smearing his face and hands. Immediately the meat began to process and disperse throughout his body, as Sunny quickly devoured heart and liver, and slurped blood where it congealed. A crack of a twig and Sunny froze in mid-chew, head snapping up and eyes falling on the Kakashi human. He was in the trees, a dark shadow watching him. Above the aroma of blood and death, the scent of fear was permeating from the leader. It was easy to imagine that he was such a sight. Blood had dribbled down his neck, and he had blood up to his elbows. "Would you join me?" he offered, then immediately realizing his mistake. He had reverted back to demon tongue, completely forgetting himself amongst his feast. The reaction was the same as with all humans. Kakashi stiffened, a hand jerked to his side where he knew a kunai sat, wide-eyed. He supposed what frightened them the most was how deep his voice was, though it was completely natural to him. Humans tended to have higher or lower octaves of voice according to gender and size. Sakura's was light and high-pitched while Natsu's and Sasuke's were lower, but did not carry the weight that the Kakashi leader had. His own was very deep, and he was pleased that it was one of the few things that had been on par with his brother's, for his was just as deep, heavy, and guttural as theirs had been, never mind his size. But his natural voice seemed to put humans on edge. Sunny swallowed the meat in his mouth and remained crouched, unsure of where this was to go. He knew that the charade had long been up, that the Kakashi leader was more than aware that he was not human. But he had never shown his eating habits to the human before, and he remembered how revolted Mayu had been when she had seen him eat. He had to simply accept that when it came to pretending, he was very poor. With a moment's insight, he knew that his time spent with Mayu had had one major flaw. Though he had learned the language, he had never tried to be human, had not pretended to do the things that humans did. He had not closed his eyes and lay in one place for hours during the night, had not learned to properly process the human food like he knew he should, or any other thing that would have labeled him as a normal human child. Mayu had been too accepting. She had let him be himself, probably awed by how different he was from her. It turned out to be a lasting and probably fatal disservice. He only had himself to blame. "Sonny." There was a look of pure determination in the human's eye, like he was about to put himself through some great tribulation. Sonny lifted his head, luminous eyes focused on the human. "Come along, Sonny. The others are asking after you." His eye remained focused on him, then the carcass, the look of determination increasing tenfold. Sonny nodded and quickly began to gobble down all he could. Who knew when he would get a decent meal again? Then began to wipe his hands and face in the grass, erasing evidence of the blood. With any luck the others would not smell it on him. Humans had such a weak sense of smell. He then followed the human back through the forest, grabbing his shirt as they passed and putting it on. That night Kakashi decided to place Natsu on second watch so he could get some shut-eye, and in the meantime, he continued to watch Naruto watch him. The scene from earlier had shocked him, seeing the blonde child devour the wolf raw, red eyes shining and intense. Kakashi had seen very little humanity in those eyes that had been so foreign, with no compassion beyond ravenous pleasure. He was determined now to get the youth to Konoha, to the Hokage, even though his instincts told him not to. He was positive that the child had eaten more than the occasional animal, judging by the way he stared at Sakura with such longing. Kakashi eyed the youth who had helped set up camp and was sitting in the crook of a tree's roots, digging into a small pouch, a look of agitation crossing his face. "What's the matter?" Kakashi asked, and the youth glanced up at him, a frown marring his beautiful features. "No more peppermint," he muttered glumly, then dropped the pouch in disgust. He dropped his head in his hands and remained that way for hours, and when Natsu came to take Kakashi's place, the boy still did not move, despite Natsu's inquiries. As the jounin settled for the rest of the night, he hoped that by morning his team would all remain in one piece. Endo River was home to several species of bird, mammal, and amphibian life forms that immediately evacuated the area upon their arrival. They quickly set up camp in the remaining trees that surrounded the river and breathed in the fresh water air as they settled down for a few hours. Konoha was less than a few days away, and not many real baths had been taken since Wave, so the opportunity was welcomed by all. Sakura grabbed the last of her clothing and began to head towards the river, and was quickly followed by Sunny. "Whoa there!" Natsu called in surprise as he grabbed Sunny's arm. "Where are you going?" Sunny glanced at the hand holding his arm then sent him a puzzled look. "I'm going to take a bath." Natsu chuckled and sat down in the dirt. "Why don't we wait until Sakura is done? Okay." Sunny frowned and sniffed his arm. "But I'm dirty." "Why do I have to wait until after she is done?" Natsu stared at him. "Because she's a girl." "So?" Natsu's eyebrows rose to his hairline. "Either you know too much about girls or too little," he muttered. "Look, you smell fine. Like tree bark and peppermint. You can wait a few minutes until she's done, then you can take a bath with Sasuke and I." At this, Sasuke looked over and scowled, eyeing the brilliant blonde who turned and leered at him, then sat down next to Natsu. They waited for some time before Sakura appeared, damp, yet satisfied though she warned them about the cold water. Natsu smiled when Sunny sniffed the space near her, then made a noise of appreciation, which made Sakura turn the color of a tomato, then began to head towards the river. Natsu glanced back at his sensei, who waved at him in a manner that said he would take a bath after they were done. He wondered if he would ever see his sensei's face. "I'm going to do a perimeter sweep, so be careful while you take a bath," Kakashi said suddenly, before they could disappear from view. Natsu stopped and sent him a look of surprise. "In Konoha territory?" Kakashi shrugged. "One can never be too careful," and he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Natsu nodded in thought and glanced at Sunny, who was staring quite intently at the small leaves that had settled on the forest floor where the Jounin once stood. It came to him quite suddenly, what he was going to do to the Sasuke boy, and he had to cover his maniacal laughter under the water. He had gotten so used to the warm baths that Mayu used to draw up for him, that returning to the frigid cold of river water had been an unpleasant experience. He had not been as vocal about it as Natsu, yet had made more noise than the pathetically stoic Sasuke, so when the idea came upon him he simply dunked his head into the water. When he resurfaced, Natsu was beginning to make his exit. WW Water ISST2 C cold. C clean ALR already. M must escape. And he walked along the floor until he could leave the water, where he shivered at the bank and hastily covered himself. He then turned to them. "The water's really cold. I think you guys should get out now, lest you catch a cold. The shock of such cold water against this heat will probably make us all sick later." Sunny glanced at the Sasuke boy, who was shivering, and began to wash his head, challenging the boy rather blatantly to leave. The Sasuke boy's dark eyes narrowed, and despite his apparent discomfort began to wash his arms. Sunny turned his back on him and meticulously began to pull out the feathers in his hair, eyeing them and dropping them into the water with a sigh. He would have to catch a few birds later to redecorate. The pity was, birds were hard to catch off guard, since they always seemed aware of his presence. If only he could catch another one of those human females again, the old dying ones with all that jewelry. Perhaps in Konoha he could find another one. He glanced at the corner of his eye as Natsu gave a huff of exasperation and left the two to do their silent battle. Sunny covered his grin with a swipe of a hand and waited till Natsu was far away enough that he might not hear Sasuke's screams. He then turned to the remaining human and smiled, baring his teeth in their natural form, his eyes slowly following suit. The Sasuke boy's eyes widened, hands flew together to make the signs, but Sunny was faster. A chakra hand burst from the ground, wrapping around the startled Genin's waist, and pulled him under the water. Pulling chakra to his feet and hands, Sunny calmly pulled himself above the water and stood up, eyes dancing as he watched the human struggle for air. He had not waited too long for the game, surely the human would understand why he was suffering now. Sunny giggled as again the boy tried to toss his terror aside and make hand signs. But Sunny's crimson eyes narrowed and the chakra hand tightened around the boy's waist and shook him vigorously, causing his arms to flail about. Steam rose from the water due to the heat of the chakra, yet the only sign that the genin was fighting for his life were the bubbles and ripples that his underwater struggle was creating. Sunny began to grind his teeth together to keep from salivating heavily, his ears twitching at the sound of the human's gurgling cries. He had never tortured someone before, never knew how wonderful the sounds of the cries could be, or the intoxicating smell of terror. His presence came like a sharp angry wind and the tang of metal came to his nostrils. Sunny stiffened as the sharp kunai began to press angrily against his throat. The Kakashi leader had arrived. He had returned to the site where they had left their things, satisfied that his team was safe for the time being, when he noticed that only Sakura and Natsu were in the immediate area. "Where are Sasuke and Sunny?" he demanded quickly, startling the two genin, who were in the process of packing things up. Natsu scowled. "Oh, they're still in the water, trying to outdo each other in the stupidity department OW," he exclaimed when Sakura smacked his head. Kakashi was already headed toward the river, heart pounding in dread at what he was about to find. Upon reaching the clearing, he froze to take in the scene. Naruto was standing on the water, a display of great chakra control, arms dangling at his sides as he stared down at the water. The expression upon his face was chilling, a wide grin bearing sharp dagger-like teeth, and red eyes that seemed to be glowing. There was cruelty in that gaze, and extreme pleasure, his face almost flushed with excitement. Kakashi's eyes followed Naruto's eyes and his heart almost stopped. Before he even felt himself move, he was standing behind the blonde-haired youth, kunai drawn and at his throat. He let his killing intent fall over the boy like a veil and whispered in his most deadly voice, "Let him go." The youth stiffened and tilted his head back, eyes connecting with his own. Kakashi had fought many battles, had seen many men and women quail under him when he was ready to kill, but this crazy child merely narrowed his eyes and flared his nostrils, clearly challenging him. He would have been more appalled if not for the fact that Sasuke had stopped moving. Kakashi pressed the kunai so that it drew blood that he noticed seemed much darker than average, and got ready to do what he had to keep Sasuke alive. Did he want to kill Naruto? No, but his team came first, they were his precious people, and he would let no one harm them. No one. Within 1 second and the next, in which the boy's eyes seemed to search his, the angry chakra faded, and the youth's eyes changed back to the startling blue before averting themselves in what was a clear display of submission. Kakashi pushed him aside and reached into the water, grabbing the Uchiha and pulling him out. The boy's face was turning gray, his lips already blue, and his whole midriff was covered in angry second-degree burns. No doubt the water had leached some of the heat from the chakra, judging by all the steam. Wrapping his arms around Sasuke's burnt waist, he heaved and pushed the water out of his student's lungs until Sasuke coughed and gurgled, eyes opening wide as consciousness returned to him. Then wild black eyes darted around, no doubt searching for the blonde that was no longer there. Naruto had snuck off, but he knew that he would be seeing the youth again. He helped Sasuke to the bank, examined his wounds, which had also burned his palms and parts of his arms. Sasuke tried not to let the pain show, but the burns surely could have been worse, and as he put on a simple salve, he thanked the stars that he had arrived in time to stop his student's murder. Yes. Murder. He had seen the same look on opponents' and comrades' faces, and was equally sure that Naruto had killed other people. Sandane was going to be very disappointed. When they returned to the others, Natsu took one look at Sasuke's face and knew who the loser had been, but Kakashi was sure he didn't know to what extent, Sasuke burns being covered up by his clothing and the usual bandages that cover his arms. "Where's Sunny?" Sakura asked, and his reply was that the boy had gone off to search for something and that he would catch up later, which he was sure he would. But Natsu sent Sasuke a sidelong glance that clearly said that he didn't believe that was the case, but they continued on anyways. Sunny curled up in a ball and let resting take over, silently cursing it for coming at the time it had. He had almost not gotten away when it had descended upon him, but he had managed to make some distance between them while the Kakashi leader revived his poor pitiful human. Sunny managed a lazy smile as his eyes strayed lazily over the surrounding trees. Fire Country did have the best trees. He'd catch up to them later. The Kakashi leader was unlikely to kill him if he kept his distance. And he would, and no doubt the Sasuke boy would avoid him, never to play the game again, which was a real pity. He had felt so alive today. Nonetheless, Konoha was sure to be interesting. Sunny had popped up hours later, unscathed with several very bright feathers decorating his hair. He was all smiles and laughs, asking questions and making Sakura blush every time his eyes fell on her. He stayed clear of Sasuke and Kakashi-sensei, but whenever their eyes met, Natsu saw a steely glint enter his sensei's eyes, one that seemed to cow the blonde, though this was only displayed by the quick averting of his impossibly blue eyes. Sasuke, on the other hand, seemed to be constantly in pain, back stiff and face pinched. Whenever his eyes fell upon Sunny, a look of burning hate, and surprisingly fear, would pass through them. But Sunny seemed oblivious to his hate, and he listened when they lectured about ninja protocol and things of that nature. And so the next few nights went on in peace, with very few surprising or daunting moments, and no one challenged them, or one another. "We must be near the village," Sunny said suddenly, startling the group out of their thoughts. They had just started walking that morning, all of them seeming to suffer from the same bug called grouchiness. Natsu turned to him in curiosity. "Oh yeah? What makes you say that?" Sunny's head tilted in a bird-like manner, ear to the wind. "I can hear them, and smell them." A look of distaste passed through the sharp eyes. Before he could reply, Kakashi's voice cut through the air. "Konoha is a few miles away. We'll be there before nightfall." Sakura turned round eyes towards Sunny, who seemed to have lost interest and his face had gone blank. The day passed, they stopped at checkpoints where guards stood and greeted them, eyes running over Sunny in a curious manner, for he was a sight, such a beautiful child he was, but they were not accosted, and it was only a matter of time that they were pulled into the stream of human and animal that entered and exited the village. Natsu sighed in relief at the familiar gates, at the towering buildings and at the smells of human life, missing how the cattle shuddered when they passed or how the birds scrambled away as they approached. He missed the growing agitation that began to grace Sunny's face, or how his purple eyes darted here and there, nostrils flaring, and a low hum coming from deep in his chest. It was good to be home. He burst forth from the earth with a howl like a newborn babe from its mother's womb, but the forest shuddered at the rage that poured forth from his body. The demon staggered to its feet and blinked yellow eyes at the blaring sun, and was greeted by a world gone quiet by his presence. The rage remained and he screamed and stumbled, legs unused to movement and body weak with hunger and extensive healing. A year and some of resting and recuperating, and still he felt like a mess, inside and out. The human he had eaten had only served well for a few hours before his reserves had to be used, and now that he was down to nothing, he had to find food fast. Zorn moved as fast as his weakened body would allow, digging small rodents from their hiding places in the earth and devouring whole colonies. Whatever he could get went into his mouth and was processed the moment it hit his stomach. For days he went on his single-minded eating frenzy, ate anything that moved until his body felt strong enough to hold thoughts and heart strong enough to bear the truth. His brothers were dead. He had barely escaped the madness that hung at the edge of his mind, threatening to engulf him at every moment, whenever his mind strayed to his loss. His brothers were dead. There was no long-winded battle, no excitement, and no human bodies littering the forest floor. The terror had been theirs, and theirs alone, and death had come quickly for them all. All except him. Zorn's shoulders slumped where he sat under a particularly depressing willow tree and let the misery wash over him. No crick to boss him around, no Tka to make him feel like a demonling whenever he opened his mouth, no Spate to mess with, or Sunny to. Zorn's head snapped up, eyes flaring yellow at the thought of the last member of the pack. He searched all his bonds, the ones with his brothers were no longer existing, a vast emptiness, but when he searched for Sun's, he felt it like some vague shock. Sunny was still alive. Zorn jumped to his feet, his muscles vibrating with excitement. He wasn't alone. He turned in the direction he sensed Sunny in, and made to leap for the trees when full understanding hit him. Sunny was alive. The cause of all his pain was off somewhere, most likely not paying for his own pack's destruction. Zorn growled and grit his teeth, leaping into the trees. He was going to find that little wretch, and when he did. Chapter 13, Sandane. Sandane. He was overwhelmed by how immense this village was compared to the previous one he had been in, and the sheer size alone made him nervous. He felt like a small ant trapped in a termite mound. Humans milling about, moving toward or from some wayward task that consumed their lives. Tka had said humans moved through their lives in such a rush that it was no wonder they died so quickly. Or perhaps it was that knowledge, that time was short for them, that made them move like they had no time at all. And perhaps they didn't. But scanning their faces, he could see that they were content, maybe accepting such a short existence. How long would he live if he was not killed? How many millenniums would he watch go by? These morose thoughts left a glum look upon his ethereal features and he trudged along with reluctance. Humans talking, laughing, shouting, fixing things and breaking them, hugging, cursing, a myriad of emotions and actions done within moments of each other. He eyed the humans as they sent him curious looks, one small offspring pointing a small grubby finger at his adorned locks. Would there be a time when he moved with such purpose as the humans did? Perhaps I already am, he thought, glancing at his new companions. Natsu and Sakura were talking in quick excited voices, looking more relaxed than he had seen them in the week of their acquaintance. Even the Sasuke boy looked more at ease, though he still walked stiffly. Only the Kakashi leader was giving off waves of distress, and he noticed how his eye would drift over to him on occasion. They moved along with the flow, his eyes darting to all the humans milling about him. A dog barked viciously at him, frothing at the mouth, eyes wild. Next to it a girl cowered in shock at the rage emanating from her once amiable canine. Sunny bared his teeth and growled at an octave too low for the human ears to hear. The dog yelped in mid-bark and fled, leaving the girl stunned and frightened. Sunny, the Kakashi leader admonished, and Sunny ducked his head. For now he would do as required. For now. Shino enjoyed training in the forest outside of the gates. Insect life was more free, unfettered by human life, running their natural course and obeying their own laws. Kiba enjoyed being in the forest less, not because he didn't enjoy wildlife, on the contrary, Wild was his middle name, it was merely that Akamaru was hard to control in the forest, easily distracted by the scents and trails of other living creatures. And though most places made her nervous, Hinata did enjoy the peaceful wildlife of the forest because most of the dangerous animals did not come close to the walls and it didn't feel like she was constantly being watched. Kurenai-sensei, however, seemed at ease with any place, any situation, and he could respect her for that. In the beginning he had been skeptical of the kunoichi, but after 5 minutes in her company, any doubts he had faded. Every day he looked forward to what he would learn, what he could teach his kekai bugs to do. Today was going to be one of those fact-filled days he looked forward to. As they approached the gates, Kurenai spotted Team 7 passing through and lifted a hand in greeting towards the copy nin. Hataki-san, for once, wasn't reading one of his degrading porn books she so despised, and his team seemed in good health, though she noticed Uchiha's stiff walk. Then she noticed the fifth person walking next to Kazuya Natsu, and she raised a brow in curiosity. He was definitely the most eye-catching child she had ever seen, with bright blonde hair decorated with white, brown, and blue feathers. His ears, from what she could see of them, were adorned with dangling and loop earrings, though much was hidden by his blonde halo of hair, and laying on his chest were several necklaces. His eyes were a cerulean blue, his face so beautiful, that for a second she thought he was some type of angelic apparition. But he made shadows, and when her eyes fell on his cheeks, she froze and blinked. Hard. They were faint, almost silvery, but they were there. 6 whisker marks, 3 on each side. Her team paused beside her and noticed the approaching team. She took in the boy's walk, though it was more like a predatory glide, like he had muscles in places humans didn't. Uzumaki Naruto. Yo! Natsu! Kiba called, and the dirty blonde from Team 7 turned pleasant brown eyes on them. He smiled cheerfully and waved. Hey Inuzuka-san. Going on a mission? Nah, Kiba replied as the team stopped in front of them. Kurenai looked directly into the masked nin's eye, and saw the almost imperceptible nod. She also saw how unhappy the infamous copy nin was. We're just going out to train. What about you? Back from a mission? Natsu nodded. Yeah, though it turned out to be a B-ranked mission. We actually fought a powerful nuke nin from Mist. Hinata gave him wide eyes. It was barely a secret that she had a big crush on Natsu. Oh! And we helped escort a new friend to Konoha. He turned towards the boy standing near him. This is, You know, Sonny, I never asked what your family name was. He said, looking sheepish. The boy's head swiveled towards Natsu, eyes puzzled, as if he had no clue what the dirty blonde was asking. And Kurenai could see an alien look pass over his face like a shadow, the look of someone whose mind worked on a completely different level, on completely different reasoning. My name is just Sunday. I don't have a family name. Natsu opened his mouth as if to continue, but then he blinked and shrugged, as he had become used to the paradox of the boy. And perhaps he had, having spent more than a week traveling with the vessel. Kurenai noticed the steady glare that the Uchiha boy was directing toward Uzumaki, and noticed the white marks around his tightly pressed lips. It was the look of concealed pain. I trust your mission was a success, she said to Hataki-san, and the copy nin turned his solemn eye on her. They communicated through that one look. Uzumaki was to be treated as a spy, was to be watched and studied. If he had been alive this whole time, then someone would have been his caretaker, and only a fool village would pass up the opportunity to harness the power of a Jinchuriki. Sometimes she felt like Konoha was a village of fools, so easily they let someone take the beautiful baby. A small growl and whimper came to her ears, and she turned to see the pup Akamaru shudder under Kiba's arm, eyes focused on the blonde. The eerie blue eyes fell on the pup, but there was no malice in the gaze. As a matter of fact, there was nothing in the gaze, and it moved on to stare at Hinata. The blonde brows rose when the boy noticed her eyes, and he took a step forward, standing directly in front of her, moving past the standard personal bubble that people have when they don't know you. Hinata ducked her head and blushed, and the boy leaned forward and bent his head so he could look at her eyes. Sonny, Kakashi said in a warning tone. Kurenai had only heard him use a few times on the battlefield, and the boy heeded his voice, simply stepping back and smiling at the timid Hyuga. You have pretty eyes, he said in a pleasant voice that carried a strange accent that she had never heard before. Hinata's face turned like a ripe tomato, and Kurenai resisted the urge to laugh. This boy was already on his way to being a true lady killer. Then the amusement vanished when she saw the considering look that the boy was giving the Hyuga heir, a look she had seen in only a few rather cruel humans. Like he was picking her apart with his eyes. He had such cold eyes. Akamaru was whimpering in the fold of Kiba's jacket, while he stared warily at the newcomer, fighting the urge to come to Hinata's rescue. The things that Akamaru was saying frightened him, words like monster and death kept coming out of the pup's mouth. He could even feel the tension riding off of Shino. No doubt his bugs were as agitated as Akamaru. Natsu reached out and pulled Sunny away from Hinata, and the tension faded. He turned his eyes on the rest of them, and there was nothing but goodwill in them. They sparkled and beamed. But no one was fooled. "Well, we're going to give a missions report to the Hokage," the Kapinin said, and that seemed to pull everyone out of the moment. Team 8 moved out of the way as Team 7 passed. Natsu gave a small wave, then leaned forward as Sunny whispered something in his ear. Natsu's face went pale and he bestowed a weak smile upon the brilliant blonde before putting an arm at his back and moving him along quicker. Kurenai turned to her team and saw that Kiba was staring after them, lips drawn into a hard line. "What is it?" she asked, and he blinked and sighed. Akamaru heard what he said to Natsu. "He said he liked your eyes. They remind him of pools of blood. Akamaru says he smells of many deaths. We better stay away from him. He's bad news. My bugs won't follow him," Shino said in an emotionless voice. "They are afraid." He was being lectured by Natsu on how to treat the Hokage with the utmost respect and consideration. From what he had read in the ninja handbooks, the Hokage was the most powerful human in the village. More powerful than Kakashi, more powerful than the humans who had killed his pack. He was going to smile and sweet-talk this powerful human, use the lure if he had to, learn all the arts of the ninja. Sunny preened. He had come to the right place, done the right thing, he was sure of it, and perhaps the pack would be proud of him. And yet, despite coming to the right place, he felt an unexplainable hate towards this village, something that felt so deep, so much a part of him, that he was sure he had been here before. Been here like it belonged to him, like all of Fire Country did, that this village was his and it had wronged him somehow. "Hey! Is that someone from Hidden Rain?" Sakura asked suddenly, and the team looked to see 4 humans standing by a stall, eyeing a map. Their Hitayate had what looked like a raindrop. "What are they doing here?" Kakashi glanced at the group and shook his head. "Let's focus on finishing this mission first. Remember, it isn't over until we report it to the Hokage." The team continued on. Sunny gazed about the village, eyes falling here and there. He was about to meet the Hokage. Sarutobi put the finishing touch on the kanji and exhaled pleasantly. Even with the added task of inviting rivaling villages to Konoha, and the increased security, he managed to get some time to himself and relax, enjoying the art of calligraphy that he seldom was allowed to do these days. Soon Jounin with teams would be entering their students in the Chunin exams, and he vaguely wondered if any of the new rookies would be joining. Already Madogai had entered his team, bragging about how his team was charged with the burning flame of youth. He had assuredly agreed about the little clone guy had created in his own image, Rock Lee, a most promising youth, even if he couldn't wield chakra. He wondered about Team Kurenai, Asuma, and Kakashi. They had yet to enter their students. There was a knock on his door and he let his shoulders sag. Well, it had been good while it lasted. "What is it?" he called as he stood up and pulled on his robes, put his hat on, and strode to his desk, sitting down in his best Hokage manner. "Perhaps news of the Kazekage from Suna, who was arriving today." "Sir, it's Team 7 reporting from their mission," a voice called from behind the door. Sarutobi smiled and told him to let them in. The door opened and Team 7 shuffled in, first with Haruno Sakura, looking only slightly disheveled but pleased with herself. Then came Uchiha Sasuke, and he noticed immediately the stiff-backed walk, that the boy had been injured though he made no noises and kept his face blank. He worried about that boy. Ever since the Uchiha massacre, he had been keeping an eye on the youth. Kakashi had told him of the boy's desire to avenge his fallen clan at all costs, and hoped that somehow being in such a positive team would help the boy choose a different path than revenge. Revenge had always been a one-way path, and when the end is reached, there was usually nothing left. In came Kazuya Natsu, one of his favorites, one of the most pleasant and well-behaved children he had ever met. But though he usually greeted the Hokage with a smile, and often candy, he was now looking back at a fourth child with a slightly anxious expression as Kakashi entered the room and motioned for the Chunin to close the door behind him. He noticed the look in the Kapinin eyes, chagrin and apprehension, and it seemed directed towards the brilliant blonde that moved behind Sasuke, whose body stiffened in response, and passed on to stand next to Sakura. He then was able to actually get a look at the extra child, and actually felt his world spin. Kakashi held back a groan. This was not going to go well. He watched as his Hokage's face turned an ashen gray as his eyes focused on Uzumaki, who had positioned himself as far from Kakashi as he could manage without making it look obvious. But he was already onto him. The Sandane's dark brown eyes widened, his mouth opened, then closed, only to open again. "Hokage-sama? Are you alright?" Natsu asked, voice laced heavy with concern, eyes darting between Naruto and the Hokage. Uzumaki was staring at the Hokage, eyes focused solely on the old man's brown ones, as if he were trying to see into the Hokage's soul. Sandane abruptly stood up and moved around the desk. Kakashi made to move to Naruto's side. He had already thought that perhaps Naruto was sent here by some rival village to assassinate the Hokage, and what better way than to come straight at his heart. He knew that the boy was no henge, solely because he had felt that signature chakra, the chakra of the Kyuubi. But this was not Uzumaki Naruto, and he was ready to tell the Hokage that, and tell himself that, for he was still Naruto in his mind. The boy's nostrils flared as the Hokage approached, and his eyes narrowed, but there was no malcontent in his eyes. He seemed more curious than anything else, but Kakashi was ready for anything. Sandane stood before Nasuni, and stared down at him. "What's your name?" he whispered, eyes burrowing into the cerulean blues. Any other person would have cringed, or become nervous, but Sunny seemed to return to that unnatural stillness as he cocked his head to the side and eyed the Hokage. For a moment, heavy silence reigned in the room, then the boy spoke. "My name is Sunny." The Hokage blinked, took a step back, then let his eyes rove over the angelic face, falling on the faint whisker marks. He lifted his gaze and looked at Kakashi, his eyes asking the same question Kurenai had asked, except this one put so much hope into that one question. Kakashi gave a minute nod and the Sandane shut his eyes, as if he were in pain. Natsu's eyes were darting to everyone in the room, to the grim face of his sensei, the stoic silence of Sasuke, to the confused nervousness of Sakura. The only one who seemed unperturbed was Sunny himself, though he was completely still, showed no signs of ill comfort at the strange behavior of the Hokage. The Hokage placed a hand on Sunny's shoulder, the youth turned his head and looked at the wizened hand. "Welcome back and Sunny," he said, a smile blooming on his face, a smile that the team had never seen before that made Kakashi inwardly sigh. Sunny looked up from the hand and suddenly, he smiled, a smile that reached his eyes seeming completely merry, and the tension melted from the room. Sakura gave a small giggle. Natsu rubbed his head and smiled, watched as the Hokage patted Sunny's shoulder, though he looked like he wanted to do more than just that pat. The Sandane then turned and returned to his desk, sitting behind the desk and turning his eyes to the rest of Team 7. "So I trust it all went well? How about a mission report?" But they could see his eyes dart over to Sunny, whose smile never evaporated. It remained, so happy, and yet, Kakashi felt that there wasn't something right about it. Like it was the same smile he might give while he was murdering babies. Happy, cheerful, as if all was too right with the world. It was just his lousy rotten luck. He had been under the impression that the Hokage would be this powerful ninja that looked similar to the Kakashi leader, but what he got was someone who looked closer to dying than even Mayu had been. He had been hoping to avoid others like Mayu. How could this dying human be the most powerful? And even though he could feel it all just under the old human's withered skin, power brimming, he couldn't help but feel disappointed, not to mention his overall scent. When the human had said welcome back, he knew it to be true, not because he knew that Fire Country was his, but also because the human Hokage smelled completely familiar. He never forgot a scent, he had been cataloging them in the back of his mind for as long as he could remember. The scent of the pack, the scent of animals he liked to eat, even before he knew what they were. He even remembered the scent of the human healer they had brought to him when he had suffered through the change even though he had no recollection of it. And he remembered this human, this scent, a scent that gave no images, but emotions. He felt happy, the scent made him feel good, or was it that this human had made him feel accepted or safe? Whatever it was, he had known this human once, and his scent had been secretly ingrained within his mind, and it made him happy. Sunny turned his head away from the others, though he felt the Hokage's eyes on him, and gazed out the window. Then the happy feeling washed straight out of him so fast he almost felt dizzy. From this height he could see a large rock fissure that seemed to almost overshadow the village, and there were faces engraved in the stone, 4 faces, all seeming male and one looking curiously like the old human sitting at the desk before them. But it was the 4th one that ruined his happy feelings. It was the 4th one that made hate spring up to the back of his throat so that he almost choked on his own rage. He shuddered at his own hate and swallowed it down before he had a fit in front of the Hokage and forced his body still, turning away from the window. The others had finished their strange mission report, received some strange paper that seemed to please them, and headed for the door. "Sasuke, stop at the hospital and get those burns checked out," the Kakashi leader said before the Sasuke boy could leave, and he watched in amusement as the human boy stiffened, and Natsu turned in startlement towards the Kakashi leader, then whipped around to stare at Sasuke before turning to look at him. Sunny smiled in response, and even allowed some maliciousness to show, and Natsu's mouth turned down in dismay. In response, Sunny shrugged, suddenly feeling bad that Natsu was upset. He actually liked Natsu had been pleasant to him, had helped him out greatly. "You're getting attached again, Sunny, you're about to make the same mistake again." Kakashi sent him a disapproving look. "Well, I'll go with him," Natsu said quietly, and Sakura immediately agreed to go with them, but not before she waved at him. "See you later, Sunny," she called, and he waved back at her. Natsu turned and gave him a small smile, one that said he wasn't mad, and Sunny beamed at him. Then the door shut, and eyes were on him again. Sunny let his smile fade around the edges and turned to the remaining humans in the room. Perhaps this was truly the beginning. He came upon the burnt clearing with a general feeling of distaste in his mouth. Sunny had been here, for how long he did not know, but the connection said that he had at least passed through here. But Soren didn't think that was the case. Sunny must be going human on them, the traitor. They should have eaten him when they had the chance. He glared at the human dwelling in disdain before moving on east. "East AST, the connection said. "East lay Sunny, east lay retribution." Chapter 14, Full Moon Howling. When the others had left, the room became silent, except for the overhead fan that spun and hummed monotonously, spreading warm air throughout the room. Kakashi turned his warm gaze toward the small child, whose deceptive blue eyes were focused on the ceiling fan. He had returned to that unnatural stillness, and the Jounin eyed his chest closely, trying to see if he had stopped breathing. But the white shirt obscured his chest movements, and it was hard to tell. Only his eyes moved, as they followed the rectangular planks of wood in their circular movements. There was a slight puzzled look in them, and it was plain that he was curious as to the function of the fan. "It's to circulate air throughout the room, in an attempt to lower the temperature," he stated. Life seemed to return to the boy and he straightened his head to look at the Jounin. "Where is your family, Sunny?" Kakashi asked, cutting to the chase. He wasn't sure he believed that the boy's family members were dead. Actually, he wasn't sure he believed anything the child had said. The boy turned to him and frowned, and he noticed that though the boy looked at him, his eyes were more focused on his nose than his eye. "I already told you, they died a year ago." His voice was laced with an unknown emotion, his eyes narrowing slightly. Kakashi glanced at the Hokage, whose eyes were riveted on the youth. "Where have you been living before your family passed away?" The Hokage asked calmly, though his eyes remained sharp and watchful. Sunny waved a hand listlessly in the air, as if to wave away the question. "We lived in the forests of Earth Country, I think it was called." His eyes narrowed again. "It's not important though." The Sandane sighed and leaned back in his chair, taking time to light his pipe. Sunny cocked his head and stared at the wisps of smoke as Kakashi leaned back against the wall, arms folded across his chest, eye unwavering on the youth. "I know this is a sensitive subject, and I prefer not to ask, but how long ago did your family pass away and what was the cause?" It was indeed a sensitive question, and by the boy's silence and his narrowed eyes, the question was unwelcome. The child's nostrils flared and his eyes became narrow slits on his face, and for some reason, Kakashi was reminded of a fox. A bad reminder. "Are you a spy, Sunny? Are you with another village?" Kakashi blinked along with Sunny, at the question. He had never heard the Hokage so blunt before, but on further reflection, he could understand why. Naruto had been very close to his heart when he was taken. However, the suspicious look on Sunny's face had disappeared to be replaced by confusion and curiosity. "What is a spy? I have never heard that word before." For a second, they could not understand what the boy had said. His accent had become thick and almost guttural, and Kakashi felt a shiver run down his spine at the memory of the encounter over the wolf. It had sounded so unnatural, so angry and deep that it was almost impossible to see it coming out of that small pink mouth, though at the time it was smeared with blood and viscera. "What is your native language, Sunny?" he asked, bracing himself for the reply. Sunny's head remained toward the Hokage, but his blue eyes swiveled toward him, crystalline, and with a glassy sharp look, as if they were fake, made of some type of glass rather than flesh. His mouth opened, his lips moved, and a cutting sound that was short and clipped, yet hit the ears with a sharp twinge met both of their ears. Both Hokage and Jounin stiffened. It was such a natural reaction, like their basic instincts understood or recognized this language. Perhaps it was the language of the dark, the reason why mankind feared the dark. Those glassy eyes darted between the two of them, as if gauging their reactions, cataloging them and stuffing them away in the darkest parts of his young mind. Or was that mind young at all? Perhaps this was not Sunny they were talking to, maybe it was the Kyubi no Kitsune, pretending to be a malicious little boy. That would make sense, as to why he chose Konoha out of all the hidden villages to show up at. Revenge. It would be so easy for the boy to worm his way into the Hokage's bleeding heart. So easy. Why have you come to Konoha to be a ninja and not, say, Hidden Grass? It is to my understanding that you were closer there than you were here, Kakashi questioned. I focused on the smallest of reaction, though at this point he'd seen statues with more expression. The boy was so still. Hidden Leaf, it seemed like the right place to be, the boy said hesitantly, and he actually took on a mystified expression, as if he too were puzzled about his reasons. It feels like I have come home after a long journey. A shadow passed over his ethereal features, something ancient. The Sandane rubbed his wrinkled face and gazed silently at the youth, whose attention had reverted back to the window. He had not been expecting this, had never dreamed that Sunny no Naruto would return to him. When they had found the body of the traitorous Chunin, or the pieces of him, he was sure his heart had died that day. It had taken all he had to not break down in front of his subordinates, though he had heard a few sighs of grief, and a few shaking shoulders. He had returned to his tower to Naruto's room, full of baby furniture and toys, and had wept, a picture of the bouncing baby boy in his hands. If he had known Naruto was to be taken from him that day, he would have hugged him harder, tucked him in and stayed at his bedside longer. He would have done many things differently. His eyes fell on the boy, and he could see Naruto in them. Though the eyes seemed a bit stranger in color, he was still in there somewhere. It was as clear as the fact that he had returned to Konoha, though he had a variety of choices to choose. Very few villages were lucky enough to have a sane Jinchuriki in their hands. But he was not a fool. He knew that whoever had raised the youth had a great hand in molding the mysterious mind, if he had been raised by anyone. There was the possibility that this was the Kyubi. It could so easily be a truth. It was best that he kept Naruto close to him, so he could watch him, perhaps put him in the guest room, which used to be Naruto's baby room. It had once been an office of the fourths, mostly used for storage of paperwork and other things the young yondaime had tossed aside. When Naruto had come into his care, he had changed that room into Naruto's so that he could be on the job and have Naruto nearby. Well then, he said, standing up and moving from behind the desk. Welcome home, Sunny. There is a room next door that has been vacant for some time, and I'm sure we can work something out for you. The child followed him as he headed for the door. He caught Kakashi's eye. There was undoubtedly a strained expression on his masked face. He gave the Jounin a small nod, a signal that the man should remain after this was all settled. He opened the door to the office/guest room and coughed as a wave of dust assaulted him. He waved a hand in front of his face and walked into the room and glanced around with a small sigh. The room was empty. Well, I'm sure I can get a bed and a few necessities in here by tonight. He turned to Sunny smiling. The boy was walking around the room, then stood at the window and peered out at the village again. I'm sure you must be tired from the journey. The child continued to gaze out the window, but his accented voice floated over to him. Does this mean I will be allowed to become a shinobi? Sarutobi nodded. Yes, I'm sure I will be able to provide you with a sensei. Ebisu's face flashed through his mind. Tomorrow he would talk to the man and see if he was willing to take on another pupil, well aware that Konohamaru was a handful all on his own. In the meantime, would you like something to eat? The youth turned from the window and looked at him, a curious look, so unreadable, but he shook his head and returned to the window. Clearly he wanted to explore the village. Sunny, why don't you go out and explore the village? I am sure there is much to see. The boy turned to him, a pleased and excited expression gracing his face, and he all but hopped toward the door, heading back into the Hokage's main office. As he passed Kakashi, the bounce left his body and he literally circled around the Jounin to reach the door, as if he didn't want to get too close to him. The boy looked up at the Jounin out of the corner of his eyes, and as he saw the Jounin's gaze upon him, he quickly averted his eyes and exited the room. Sandane sat down at his desk and surveyed the Jounin for a moment, taking in the tension that seemed to bundle around his shoulders. Tell me how this came to pass, he said as he tapped his pipe, and touched the intercom, ordering an umbu to follow the youth. Kakashi straightened from where he was leaning against the wall and fixed his eye on his Hokage. In the next moment, he became privy to all the facts, from fleeing animals, to the chilling skirmish between the Uchiha and Sunny, and to Kakashi's theory that Sunny ate humans, a thought that made his stomach drop and his blood to run cold. Make no mistake, Hokage-sama, this boy has little humanity left. We have no clue who, or what for that matter, has shaped his mind. He can either be our greatest asset, or worst enemy. We'll have to tread carefully with this one. He's dangerous in ways we can't even imagine. The Hokage sat in his seat, mulling over the Jounin's words that he had already thought. Hokage-sama, the intercom crackled, and he was pulled away from his dark thoughts. Yes, Yuzuru, the Kazekage from Sunigakure had arrived, sir. Thank you, the aged man said with a sigh, and got to his feet. And so it all begins. Orochimaru seems active, and I invite foreigners into my beloved village. How will this all end? Kakashi stared at the man, so old and yet able to bear such responsibility. By the way, Kakashi, will you be entering your students into the exams? Kakashi bowed. Yes, I believe they are ready. It was curious, he supposed. He had hated the last human village, and it had been even smaller than this one. Once again he had to stop and breathe slowly. All of his life, the scent of the forest had been his constant companion. Earth, wood, vegetation, and the animals that occupied it. But the humans created smells that were not even their own. As he moved amongst the flow of scented humans, some smelling of sweat, others of their strangely burned food, and occasionally, and he noticed it was mostly females, the smell of flowers or fruit. He liked that, females always smelled closer to the earth, and it made him reminiscent of times when he and the pack had dined on a few human females in the comfort of their own territory. The village was even noisier than the last one, livelier, smokier. And it was his. He felt a sense of disdain, as if once this area had not been like this, perhaps there were more trees, and he was sure there had been, especially since the village was surrounded by forests. And there was the cliff, with the faces, and he didn't like them because it seemed as if they were watching him. How had they gotten there? Suddenly his ears were bombarded by the warning cries of animals, and he looked to see a gate barring a large human dwelling. There were dogs at the gate, barking at him, frothing at the mouth, then running from the gate towards the dwelling, only to run back and continue barking. They were rather large, and looked well fed. Hunger returned to him, as well as his temper. Silence, he hissed in demon tongue, but the dogs only retreated, continuing their mad barking. Sunny moved past the dwelling, eyes purple and narrowed, hearing the answering call of humans. They had alerted their masters. He continued to walk on, not bothering to glance back, though he could feel the eyes of the humans on his back. He passed by a strange building, recognized the word academy only because Natsu had referred to it so many times, and headed toward the compound. He could hear the sounds of many humans, all seeming young judging by the high-pitched voices, and rounded the side of a dwelling and coming upon a field where many human youngling were standing, throwing kunai at wooden circles. He leaned against the wall and watched as they chattered, reminding him of squirrels with their noise, and watched them toss the kunai. Some hit the wooden squares while others missed. Standing amongst them were older humans, directing them, tossing kunai to show them how it was done. He noticed there were more younglings than adults, so much more, in fact, that if one went missing, it could be some time before they were missed. Sunny eyed a particular human male youngling, smaller than him, but had a carriage that said he knew what he was about. He tossed the kunai, and it landed perfectly in the middle of the wooden circle. The females squealed in admiration. He smiled charmingly at them. Sunny lifted his head and sniffed the air, moving through scent so he could catch the boys, and that's when he smelled it, a scent, and a familiar one, because he had smelled it back when he left the Hokage's tower. Sunny pushed himself from the wall and took a step forward so that the dwelling wasn't blocking the wind, and there it was. The acrid scent of soap mixed with stale blood that had lingered, and the scent of human, male, from what he could tell. He did not look about, in fact he kept his gaze on the human younglings. But he felt annoyed. There was a human following him. But let's test this theory, he thought, and wandered away from the academy. He coasted down several pathways, mingling amongst the humans, giving curious looks as much as he had received them. He stopped to stare at several humans making music, that lovely collection of sound that was apparently created by several objects that the humans blew into, plucked at or hit rhythmically. It was a wonder, and he was pleased to stand there watching and listening to them play. It was probably the only pleasant sound humans made, besides screaming. Humans screamed like no other. When the performance was finished, he lifted his head, sniffed, and sure enough, it was there. He was apparently upwind from the human. Why was he being followed? Had the Kakashi leader sent this human after him? Or perhaps the Hokage? Sunny turned away from the humans and made to walk away when his body stiffened, eyes bled to red, and he swiveled around, blood rushing through his veins. His hearing expanded, his skin vibrated at the touch of the wind, and an alarm was going through his head. And then he knew, as cloaked and concealed as it was, it could not hide from him while in his territory. There was a demon in his territory. He should be excited. He was not alone. The last demon he had encountered was in the sea of grass. He yearned to be with his kind, and yet there was a rage in him. Another demon had entered his territory without permission, without homage. This had never been a problem with the pack. Crick was lord over the forests of Earth Country, and there were so few demonkind that most land went unclaimed. But he clearly had claim on Fire Country. Sunny spun on his heel and stalked down the pathways, rage building in him, color distorting until he could only see reds, yellows, and orange. He barely noticed that humans were quickly moving out of his way, and that the human who had been following was speeding up. He could only think of guarding what was his, making his opponent cower before him. Strange feelings, strange emotions. He rounded onto another pathway and stopped. Familiar scents, familiar voices, and the rage leaked out of him, enough so that he could see, and most importantly think. Natsu, Sasuke Boy, and Sakura stood next to a smaller dark-haired human, all seeming cleaned up and refreshed. Sasuke Boy's wounds seemed to be healed as well. Opposite of them were two humans, one a blonde female, the other in clothing and markings so bizarre he could not exactly say what was wrong with the human. But it was the third, the demon, that took up his vision. Green eyes stared wide-eyed at him. This one was tricky, obviously hiding his form in the guise of a human. But he was demonkind, and had clearly trespassed. He stepped forward and, disregarding the humans about, addressed the trespasser in demon tongue. / Who are you that you come into my lands without homage? Do you think me a weakling? / He demanded. The humans gasped and backed away. The demon stared at him, eyes wide and shocked. He waited impatiently for the reply, but the demon seemed too stunned to say anything to him. He took him in, glancing at the red hair, the large object strapped to his back, the strange marking on his forehead, and the heavy bags around his eyes, a sign he'd seen in humans as fatigue and exhaustion, a lack of sleep. Sleep? Demons did not sleep. Was this a part of the disguise? Sunny sniffed his scent, taking in the scent of earth, lots of earth, stale blood, demon, and under all that, human. He was more puzzled. / Why do you not answer me? Do you continue to insult me in my own lands? / Who are you? The demon asked, and Sunny literally reared back in shock. Not only did the demon speak to him in the human tongue, but perfectly, as if it was the only tongue he spoke. This was not going well. The human female stepped forward, and Sunny noticed she carried a large strange object on her back. Who are you? She demanded. What village are you from? She took in his clothing and noticed he had no Hatayate. His clothing said nothing about him either. The violent red eyes started to her, and Sunny snarled in barely controlled human tongue, "Be silent or I will eat out your throat and shut you up for good, you worthless, insignificant bug." The bizarrely dressed human boy near her gasped and took a step forward, a look of rage on his face, but by then the demon had regained his bearing and said in a dark tone, "Kankuro, say a word and I will kill you," and there was such menace in his voice that Sunny couldn't help but be pleased, that is until he felt the source, and noticed the sand stirring around the demon's feet. Sunny's eyes narrowed, and he eyed the demon closely. He wore many of the things Sunny had seen human ninja wear, and he had one of those headbands, though it was around his leg. Had this demon done what he was doing? Had it gone into the human world and learned to use the chakra? Maybe he wanted to continue to pretend. Very well then, Sunny said, making up his mind and ignoring the humans, though he noticed Team 7 off to the side, watching him guardedly. You will meet me, near the academy, we will talk of this. You will bring homage to me, or we will fight to the death, and I refuse to lose. This is my territory. Without waiting for a reply, he turned from the demon and stalked from the scene, glancing at Natsu as he passed. The human had a frown on his face, but when their eyes connected, Natsu gave a weak smile, the effort softened him, and Sunny let his eyes bleed back to blue, He smiled warmly at the other, lifting a hand in greeting before continuing on. He had to get to the Hokage, so he could learn a few jutsus before his meeting tonight. If this came to blows, he wanted to be the victor. Sunny glanced at the sky and stopped in surprise. It was a full moon tonight. He grinned, pleased, and ran down the pathways, only vaguely caring that the human was still following him. He'd deal with that later. Returning to the tower was an ordeal in itself. Humans were staring at him, some even had the gall to whisper, which was pointless since he could hear them quite well. Questions like, "Is that him? And he is so beautiful," passed through the air, and he resisted the urge to scowl. He was a demon on a mission, protect his territory from the sand demon. He followed the vaguely familiar pathways toward the room the Hokage had given him, and as he opened the door, he glanced behind him and noticed there was a human standing at the end of the hall behind him, a human garbed in black with a mask over its face, white, with markings animal-like, though he did not know which one. He could sense its eyes on him, and returned the stare, curious as to whom this was. He sniffed the air, and classified it as female, a curious notion, for she too smelled of blood. Was she following him too? How many followed him? Sunny's eyes narrowed and he entered his room and shut the door. There was a bed and a table now in the room and nothing else. Sunny sat down on the bed, relaxed his body as if he were going into resting, and waited. This was familiar to him, waiting. He'd done a lot of that. An hour before sunset, the Hokage knocked on his door and entered after a second. Sunny pulled himself out of his self-induced stupor and smiled up at the dying human. He didn't know why he always felt happy when he saw the man. It was an unsettling emotion, and very annoying as well. In the human's hands were several small pieces of paper and larger ones that were rolled up. He set the papers on the table, then pulled out small square ones from his pocket. He stepped up to Sunny, who decided to gather himself to his feet. "These are your baby pictures," the Hokage said, his voice gentle. "I had taken so many of them before your departure." He handed the baby pictures to Sunny, who took them, then stared at them. The first one was an image of the dying human, though he looked younger, and was undoubtedly holding a small round human youngling on his lap. The human had blonde hair, twinkling blue eyes, and a toothless mouth. He saw himself in the youngling. Sunny let the picture fall to the floor, and another took its place. Here he was crawling on the floor, reaching up for the leg of a chair. There were many others, pictures of him laughing, sleeping, and eating wretched human food. Sometimes he was alone in the picture, other times he was with the Hokage, or some nameless human female. There always a grin on his face, he had seemed so happy. He couldn't remember the last time he had been that happy, not since the pack had died anyway. But what did this all mean? Why had he been with humans? Why did he seem so human in these pictures? What had he been before the change? The pack had never been forthcoming about his origins beyond the fact that they had found him within the custody of a human. He had always imagined that he had been kidnapped, or that his blood pack had been annihilated and a human had picked him up, mistaking him for one of their kind. But this said something else entirely. He dropped the rest of the pictures on the floor and let his eyes roam to the papers on the table. All the while, the Hokage had been silent, studying his actions, perhaps thinking he was going to have some type of epiphany after seeing the pictures. If he had, he showed no emotion to it, and he promptly turned to the table. "I brought you some basic jutsus the young academy students learn, and I have asked one of my trusted men to take you on as a student. I would teach you myself, but as Hokage, my time is taken up by the duties of this village. The time when I had taken on students has long passed. You can look them over now, but I suggest you wait until your new sensei comes for you tomorrow." At the word sensei, Sunny looked up sharply from the scrolls. "Sensei? What of Kakashi leader?" The Hokage raised an eyebrow at Sunny's question. "Do you like Kakashi, Naruto?" The boy averted his eyes and stared down at the scroll he was unrolling. It wasn't that he disliked the Kakashi leader, as much as it was hard to swallow that the human was superior to him, something he could not deny. Kakashi leader was dangerous, and he sensed many like him in this village, in his territory. He saw the Hokage's hand move to his heavy sleeves, and he pulled out a book. Sunny's nostrils flared at the scent of uneasiness that was coming off the dying human in waves and took the book when the Hokage held it out to him. But the human didn't let go of the book, and Sunny was forced to look up at him. "This is a book on the history of Konoha, so far not very long, but very informative. This is also a book given to the academy students. If you have any questions, any at all, I stress that you come to me immediately. He let go of the book and patted his head gently. It seemed like an entirely familiar move, and it even made him smile charmingly up at the human, which seemed to please him very much. He again asked Sunny if he was hungry, which he said no to. He did not want to shovel human food down his throat, unless it was the human itself. The Hokage seemed disturbed by this, but he let it go, and bade him good evening. When the Hokage had departed, Sunny pored over the scrolls, but was puzzled at what the scrolls wanted him to do. Strange instructions that had to do with horses and monkeys. They all seemed to be under the impression that he understood everything they said. He had been speaking human tongue for only a short time. Team 7 was the first time he had really used the language. Though he had been taught by Mayu, he hadn't spoken to her much. He could read human, but he could not comprehend more than half the words. Humans had too many things in their lives, too many names, too many everything. By then he was completely frustrated, because he knew the sand demon knew all about these things, and had an upper hand on him. He resisted the urge to pound the table. Instead he sat by the window and eyed the rising full moon. Already he could feel its pull, and the urge to sing was heavy within him. But tonight was not for singing. Tonight was for dominating, tonight was for claiming what was his and not letting another steal it from him. Fire Country was his and his alone. Sunny glanced from the window, saw that the pictures still remained on the floor, and shuddered. He was so confused. He wished that Crick and Ka were here. They always had answers, always knew what was going on. He cocked his ears toward his door, and could hear the masked human still at the end of the hall, silent yet breathing in a very relaxed manner. He rubbed his face roughly and opened the window slowly, hearing all the small scrapes that his superior ears could hear but was sure that the humans couldn't. When it was fully open, he reached out, grabbed the sides and eyed the large dwelling opposite of him. The Hokage's tower was the tallest dwelling in the village, and was surrounded by smaller, yet tall buildings as well. He was a ways from the academy, but was sure he could make it there in a mere few minutes. Sunny let his eyes bleed to red as he pulled back from the window, letting his arm muscles stretch and go taut as they still gripped the sides of the window. He then let his arms snap him forward, his feet found the window sill, and the deceptive muscles in his legs brunched and launched him forward, and he soared from the tower window. As he flew from the tower, he realized he had put too much force into the push, and was sure he would go right over the dwelling he had been aiming for. But there was another dwelling behind it that seemed 3 windows taller, and he shifted so that he landed sideways on it, allowing a trickle of chakra to stick him to the surface just like Crick had taught him. The full moon glowed above him in the silent village, and the thought of the pact brought a wail from his throat, a long haunting keen that silenced the crickets and startled the surrounding humans awake, made the dogs shudder. He could hear them now, younglings jumping out of their beds and running to their parents, and vice versa. Sunny growled deeply and launched himself from the side of the dwelling, darting from dwelling to his rendezvous point. An answering howl came to him, and Sunny stopped on a building and lifted his head north. The howl said acceptance, excitement, anticipation. It had been long since someone of his kind had sung with him. Sunny lifted his head and wailed again, dropping undertones that humans wouldn't pick up but animals would, and it sent the animals of Fire Country wild. But he was pleased, though he had made a spectacle when he had been meaning for secrecy, because at the same time the sand demon howled with him, seeming as pleased as he. Lights in human dwelling turned on, he spotted several human shinobi jump onto their roofs, and he quickly dropped to the ground and out of sight, heading for the academy in the shadows, heart pounding and blood pumping under the rays of the moon. He felt so alive. Gaara was nervous. Nervous. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this emotion. It frightened him, and that alone caused him to pace in agitation around the hotel room, sand swishing at his feet. Temari and Kankuro had fled his presence, though Temari had stopped to remind him not to do anything foolish to ruin the plan. He did not care for the plan, and had told her so before ordering her from his presence. They had earlier asked him about the blonde that had made those frightening noises. They had no clue that the other had been speaking to him. Another demon. Someone like him, or even more, because this creature had shut Shikaku up the moment he had entered Fire Country territory. Had Mother already known what dwelled here? He could not recall the last time Mother had been so silent. It chilled him to the core. Homage? What was the other demanding? What was that strange language he spoke that he for some reason could understand but not speak? Gaara stopped at his window and glanced at the full moon. Shikaku usually made a racket in his mind on full moons, but his head was so empty tonight. He was supposed to meet the other near Konoha's ninja academy, which was a risky place to be, seeing that he was a shinobi of Suna. But the other had demanded he come. There was a sense of death about him, and Gaara knew he didn't want to fight with the other. He wanted to know what the demon knew, what knowledge lay behind those crimson eyes. He wanted to know how he dealt with existing among people who hated and feared him, though he had seen that one named Natsu wave at him in a friendly way. Was the other hated here? He had to know. Gaara opened the window, prepared to leave, when Shikaku's whiny voice roared into his head. Homage! Give homage or we will perish! Gaara cried out in pain and grabbed his head. What, mother? What do I give? He had pounded in pain. Give homage. Give flesh. Gaara dropped to the streets of Konoha, and startled a cat scrounging in the trash bins. Gaara's sand shot forward and snatched the cat up. He grabbed the screeching animal and hit it over the head, for some reason wanting to keep it alive. Shikaku gave an appreciative murmur when it was cut off by a keening wail that washed over him and sent Shikaku to the forefront of his mind. There were no words to the wail, but he got a sense of sadness, and deep anger, but most importantly, a promise of pain or perhaps death. Whatever it was, it came from the other, and this excited him in ways that killing didn't. Was this the end of his solitude? And why did he feel like he could expect something from this stranger? He couldn't stop the howl that came from his mouth. As Shikaku rose out of him, he could feel the sand on his face crack, a pain seize his throat, and the deep melancholic call that came from his throat startled yet excited him. He had never howled before. Something like that would have caused trouble in Suna, and rejoiced in the feeling. When the wail returned to him, so more complex than the first one, he joined in, mixing his with the others, and almost laughed when the inhabitants of Konoha began to move about in fear and alarm. Intoxicating. Still holding the cat, Gaara slipped into the alleyway and headed toward the ninja academy, grinning maniacally all the while. He couldn't ever recall feeling this good. Soren tossed the dough into the tall grass and waited for the other demon to approach. The moment he had arrived he knew that this territory was claimed and had easily snagged as offering to appease the lord of the grasslands. A blue flame approached, and Soren watched warily as the blue flame flashed and formed an indigo wolf, with black eyes darker than the night skies. The demon wolf approached the doe, sniffed it, then lifted its large head and fixed its dark gaze upon him. Your youngling gave me a much better offering when he passed through here, the demon said in his mind and continued to fix Soren with its gaze. Is that so? I happen to be looking for the wayward member of my pack. Perhaps you can tell me of his passing, and if he was alone, The demon grabbed the doe by the neck and began to walk slowly into the thick grass, and his voice drifted through Soren's head like cool water from a spring on a moonlit night. He came through here, we shared a human together. He had gone east to Fire Country to avenge his pack. Soren stopped, drinking in the words and feeling numb with shock. What? The demon dropped the doe and turned his head to regard Soren over a blue-furred shoulder. The master was filled with much hate for the humans. He plans to harness the source by way of the humans, then destroy them. But that would surely get him killed, Soren cried, appalled at the sheer stupidity of the demonling. Perhaps, the demon wolf whispered, but grief tends to swallow reason. Soren stood frozen in the grass, blinking his luminous yellow eyes in disbelief. Grief? Had Sun been that upset by their destruction? Soren blinked down at the grass. Of course he would, barely more than a generation old, the pack was all he knew. I suppose you'll be retrieving him then, the blue demon wolf asked, still watching him. Being the leader of your pack now, it is your duty to take care of your own, Soren's head darted up, and he stifled a gasp. Well, that was certainly true. If only Crick had died, then Tka would have taken his place. But since Tka was dead too, that left only him. He was the leader now and it was his job to take care of Sun. Yes, he breathed quickly, it is my job to take care of Sunday East you say, he made to head forward but the wolf had a strange air about him. Why not stop and dine with me? I have a sense that I should join you on this journey, for it has been long since I have left my lands. Humans are tricky and dangerous, you will need my advice. Soren stared at the demon wolf. This demon was way older than he, so much older than any of them. Perhaps he had existed through many millennia and was no longer interested in gaining power. This one did remind him of Tka. Soren nodded in acceptance and watched as the demon wolf's lips pulled back in a grin, bearing onyx-colored teeth. Very good. I am Diadem of the Grasslands / Note. What Sunny/Naruto said when they asked him language he spoke was, demon tongue. That's it for part 3. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.